You're listening to The Dope Experience with Romby Bryant, Javier Collins, and Sal Vergara. Our conversations revolve around people looking to evolve and transform into the next phase of their lives. We're here to help them navigate this journey by developing one's perspective every day.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to The Dope Experience. My name is Romby Bryant with my co-hosts Sal and Javier. We have a great guest today, and I'm happy to introduce Dr. Barner. He was one of my professors, and if I'm being honest, he was probably my favorite professor when I was back at SMU. So I'm going to give a little bit of information about Dr. Barner, a little bio. He is an organizational development consultant and an executive coach that specializes in helping organizations strengthen their performance of their leaders. Some of the clients he has is Pioneer Natural Resources, United Technologies, Liberty Mutual, GameStop, AT&T, and Disney, just to name a few. He has written 10 books. The subject matter has been anywhere between coaching and team building, and it's been translated into several different languages. For the past 16 years, Dr. Barner served as an associate professor at SMU School of Education and Human Development. Since retiring full-time position last year, Dr. Barner continues to serve as an adjunct instructor with SMU Cox Business School. Prior to joining SMU, he spent 35 years as a talent development leader. He has held top-level talent development positions at several different companies where his responsibilities has involved executive coaching, high potential leader development, succession planning, and talent reviews. Dr. Barner has a master's and doctorate in organizational development, along a second master's in counseling and psychology, and a bachelor's degree in education and psychology. And he was my executive coach or professor at SMU. And when it comes to executive coaching, I look at you as the Bill Belichick of coaching. And for some of you that don't know who Bill Belichick may be, he's probably the greatest football coach in the NFL right now. Javier, he also had him in class, so he has a little bit to say about him as well.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Romby. Good to see you, Sal. And thank you very much to our most esteemed guest, Dr. Bob Barner. As Romby mentioned, your expertise and your reputation in the field precedes you. You actually were my first professor in executive coaching, and very memorable experience. I see you as a mastermind in the field of executive coaching, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Do we want to hop into it now, fellas, or we're talking about blind spots? That's kind of the topic of the day, and I'm really looking forward to getting your input and feedback on that topic, Bob. One of the things that coming from my background with football, blind spots is something that is a phenomenon that's seen on the field. It's kind of where you don't want to be. You don't want to have someone in your blind spot because that can be something very damaging to your body. I've gotten caught in my blind spot a few times. I'm sure Romby has too, coming across the middle, catching those balls. But yeah, so would love to get into this conversation and see where it takes us, fellas.
Great. Yeah, so the term blind spot is used for leaders. And the first time I heard it was in your class. But football, we don't have blind spots. And if we do, it's very short-lived because we evaluate ourselves every day. We go in, we watch film, and we correct ourselves. And coaches tell us, like, if you don't fix that, then you're pretty much cut. So my question to you, what are we actually talking about when we say that leaders has certain blind spots?
Sure. Thanks, guys. And thanks for that introduction. Now I have to live up to it. So let's say that using the football metaphor, if you would, a blind spot in business is much the same thing. It's any behavior that you have that you're either, number one, not aware of, or two, you're aware of it, but you don't understand the impact on other people. For example, a common situation I have in coaching is a person who gives critical feedback to other people, but doesn't realize that feedback is delivered in kind of a personal way, in a hurtful way, in a damaging way. And they're so focused on productivity that they don't understand when the person in front of them is just really damaged by the way in which they communicate that. And so it can be that, and sometimes it can even be a positive. I once coached somebody who, for example, was a leader who was exceptionally well viewed by her organization. Before she became a manager, she didn't realize that other people saw her as having leadership strength because she was very quiet and soft-spoken. And the whole idea is whenever she spoke, it was well-intentioned, it was well-focused, and she had incredible respect for her integrity. So for her, the blind spot was a positive. It was like, wow, that's a strength I have that other people see. So it can be a positive or negative, but it's just out of your field of perception.
Bob, real quickly, how can blind spots impact, say, for instance, my leadership performance, and how would I know if I had any? If you're too myopic and not realizing that you have or have not, what are some of the things that I can do to identify that?
Sure. So let me cut that in half. How does it impact on our performance? The same thing, okay? The person running down the field on a fourth football game, right? The ball's thrown. If they're not aware of the person coming up and back, smacking into them, they're going to go down. If you're on I-35 or I-75 and it's not the car in front of you that you're worried about, it's not the car in the back, it's a little car that's zigzagging in and out of your line of sight, that you say, okay, where is this person right now that is most likely to smack into you? In business, what I find is if you have blind spots and they're not addressed, you don't understand the impact you have on other people. You don't understand the part of your communication leadership style that works for you and the part of your communication leadership style that actually gets in your way. So the whole idea about closing blind spots is that we act with what I call intentionality. That means your intentions match up 100% to the results you get. What I want to see happen is what I'm getting. The more that those are out of alignment, the more that there's a chance you have a blind spot.
Okay, so how do you feel about people taking assessments to help with communication with those blind spots? Do you see any benefit in taking assessments?
Yeah, I think, and let's talk about assessments for a second. There's two different kinds of assessments. There's the psychological assessments that go on in an organization. You have the Myers-Briggs, you have the DISC, you have the Hogan, you have a whole bunch of them. And I know a lot of people use them and I know a lot of people love them. But to me, that's aiming a cannon at a fly. It's a very broad-based piece of data you have about yourself generally, but it doesn't tell how you are perceived in a specific work environment. And that's where precision data comes in. So the type of assessment that works best is the 360 assessment, where you get feedback, and it can be either in written form through a questionnaire or face-to-face through interviews from your boss, from the people you work with as peers, and from the people that report to you. That feedback is incredibly valuable. And to go back to something that Sal asked earlier, which I don't think I answered, feedback is the breakfast of champions, and feedback is the number one thing that you can do. The second thing you can do is look for areas where for some reason you have a surprise because what you expected to happen wasn't what happened. You give an inspirational talk and the people you're talking about are going to sleep. You think that you're giving useful feedback, but the person in front of you looks broken down at the end of the conversation. You come in with good intentions to resolve a conflict, but the conflict only escalates. Anytime those things occur, there's usually a pattern where what we're doing is, in our minds, what we think we're doing is very different than the way it comes out here. And so we have to connect the dots on that.
Yeah, that sounds like it even involves some triggers happening, especially when we we enter a conversation with the intention to have it go well, but I'm hearing you say it doesn't always go that way. Perhaps that's some triggers that kind of get sparked in that exchange.
Okay. Yeah. And people can be triggered by different events. Let's kind of talk about what happens there. You and I each have two different kinds of communication styles. There's a communication style we have right now. I mean, we're in a relaxed setting. We're talking informational stuff. And then there's a second communication style that we keep in our hip pocket that we bring out when we're under incredible stress. Sometimes people are blind to how that style shifts. I'm coaching one person right now who has no idea how absolutely incredibly intense he gets when he's focused on someone. The other person's doing this, but in his head, he's just concentrating, but he comes across a little bit as Darth Vader. So what I have to make him realize is that when he's up here in his head and he's stressed out, his speech becomes very clipped, and he doesn't really attend to other people, and his communication style can come across a little bit harsh. So yes, you can be triggered by that, and oftentimes when it's under stress, when we're under stressed.
Absolutely. That's a good point. Communication style. So last week on our last show, we had our guest, Randy, who really went in depth on a term called code switching. And historically, code switching deals with what you just mentioned, a communication style. Usually, or historically, it's rooted in when communication styles or even languages are different. The individuals have to switch their code to follow along in communicating. But that concept has been carried over into the corporate setting, and it involves more than communication. It even involves appearance and looks and things of that nature. It's interesting. You mentioned the two communication styles, the relaxed one and the one when we're under stress. Perhaps do you think there's others where we're very with family and with friends, maybe the darker side for some of us? So I have a question about that. I'm not sure if it's related, but I'm totally. Okay. I see this as a opportunity to pick a mastermind's brain. So I'm gonna try to stretch it as far as I can. So in line with code switching and what that entails, it's usually people who do not fit inside of a dominant culture, where they have to do something to augment themselves so that they could fit or assimilate into that dominant culture. Would you say there is any relationship or any kind of impact or increased prevalence of individuals who are working hard to switch up their code, who they really are, to fit some perception? Do you think that group has any increased chance of blind spots or being taken advantage of or being hit?
Sure, and you have multiple expectations, right? Mm-hmm. And you could have a peer group and you say, I don't want to come across phony to my peer group, but yet, there are expectations in the norm in terms of the culture. I worked in one company where I worked without a suit, I worked without a tie, but it was a standard thing. It was not a formal rule. When you went to the executive row, because I worked directly with the president sometimes, I had a clip-on tie, so I hate clip-on ties, but I could put it on fast. And I had a sport coat. I left those two things in my office all the time. A couple of different ties and a sport coat. Because he drew his view of people, even though he said nothing about it on that. He also drew his view when you were in a social engagement on whether you had one drink or two, and whether or not you became a little bit noisy, a little bit, how people get sometimes when they're really relaxed after they've had a couple of brews, and their voice gets louder. And this is a very buttoned down culture. Now, does that make me less authentic as a human being that I pay attention to that? No, I don't think so. So I think that there is a difference between being your authentic self, which means being true to your values, true to how you define integrity and living a life of integrity, and the costumes that we wear. so that we can adapt in a different way. I brought in a new coach for the first time in a very conservative business environment. And I asked her, do you know who we are and what we do and what our culture's like? She says, I know everything about you. And we were a button-down culture, a suit culture. And she walks in dressed in open-toed sandals and beachwear. Really, beachwear, the kind of, informal thing that you'd expect somebody to wear on the beach. And it was perfectly okay, and this was in Florida, perfectly okay if you were on the beach, but not in a corporate business environment. And I had to introduce her to one of the members of the senior team, and there was an eye roll that exchanged between me and that senior manager. It's like, and afterwards they looked at me like, do you not understand who we are and what the prevalent culture is? That
was a shot on you. In the
that was
eyes
a shot. Yeah, because I didn't do due diligence, and usually, I'd meet with the person first. But in this case, I had a call. I said, sounds really good. Resume looks good. Good references. And she said she knew who we were. She knew our culture. That's a big deal. And the other point about code switching is that I've done a lot of international work. And when I have my daughter-in-law, one of my daughter-in-laws is Japanese. My sister-in-law is Hispanic. My son-in-law is from India and came to the United States 20 years ago. And when we went to India for the wedding there, as in the wedding in the US, 350 people, I'm dressed in full Indian costume. What can I do to show respect to these people in this culture, this ancient revered culture, to let them know I care about their son? So for me, it wasn't losing authenticity. It was that I wanted to take part in that. And I think people that have a high level of emotional intelligence know the part of themselves that they need to change up to move into an environment, and the part that becomes phony and becomes inauthentic. And I think in terms of blind spots, it's getting feedback from the people that you care about and trust in an organization to say, number one, am I meeting the expectations of professionals and leaderships here? And two, do I come across as a real and genuine human being? Somebody who is trying to do their best. That's about all I can say about that. It's as far as I can go. It's a difficult subject. And it not only, I'll say one more thing about code switching. It not only crosses barriers on ethnicity and national culture, but also gender. There have been a number of research studies that say women are slammed as leaders when they mimic or they try to adapt the same communication styles as men. Gee, you're an assertive male leader. Right. Gee, you're a harpish, shrewish female leader. Yes. So navigating that, I have women I've coached, is a very difficult thing. I think it's difficult by age. I think it's difficult by ethnicity. I think it's difficult by national origin.
And I hope conversations like this bring light to that and people acknowledge that there is that disparity. That's unfortunate. I have a question when it comes to a two-part question, really, Bob, is one, what is the common denominator, or is there, for folks that have blind spots? Is it industry? Is it background in life? And then the second part, from a coaching perspective, are they generally amenable to it? Do they have to be talked into it? Or do they acknowledge it and say, oh gosh, I didn't realize that? Or are they, you're out of your mind, and they just have to do it because they're told to do it? I'm just curious of what the acceptability or do they embrace that from a coach perspective?
Sure. So let's take those two parts and cut it in half. And the first part is, are they amenable to coaching, right? Okay, so that's one part of what you're asking. And let's say that there are two parts of blind spots. The first part is what I bring to you with the table with my natural leadership and communication style, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing is that a blind spot can emerge if I change the context on you. So for example, I was coaching a person and they said, what's his problem? And he was new to the organization and only been there a couple of weeks. And they said, he's very arrogant and very disrespectful. And I thought, oh, this is a person who's talking down to people, who's condescending. They said, give me an example. And they say, well, in staff meetings, he's always texting. He's always doing one of these, texting. So he's multitasking during staff meetings. He didn't give people's full attention. I brought that to his attention, and he was horrified because he said, in the company I just came from, everyone did it. You had your laptop out. Usually you weren't on visual, you were on phone. Most of the people were scattered, and it's a way to gain productivity. So I thought nothing of it. As soon as I pointed it out to him, he changed. So the other thing about a blind spot, so let me just say that you have to adapt your behavior every time you have a new situation. You have a new team, you have a new senior leader in the organization, or you're in a company where the culture is changing rapidly. Are very different from what you've known. The old stuff that you've learned may or may not work there. You have to figure out how it's going to fit. So that's one thing. And Sal, to the second part of your question, there's two pieces of a blind spot. The first is, do I have the insight to know it's there? And I've done 360 reviews with people, and I say, here's the feedback you're getting from the people, and their face drops, and they're horrified. And they said, how come nobody's ever had an honest conversation with me? And I still feel so bad about this. And that is an easier thing to work with because they really, truly care. No one's just giving them information. Now, the second part is the person who knows it and pushes it out of the way and say, well, it's noise, it's static, it's not important. As long as I hit the numbers, that's the important thing. That's the more difficult person because they're justifying, they're rationalizing in their head that even though they're bumping into other cars on the highway, well, those other cars are smaller than me. I can knock them off the road. Or the important thing is I get to the end in 30 minutes, even if I have a traffic accident. So in a business environment, they're much more difficult to coach. And the thing you have to do is make them aware of how much of a headline this is on the narrative, on the story that's being written for them by other people in the organization. Because if you do not claim your narrative and write it yourself, by default, other people will write it for you.
Dr. Bonner, so
Yes.
my wife is in a hypo program at her company, Sound Physicians. So she's taken the 360 assessment or had a 360 assessment done, but it came back with flying colors, like 4s and 5s on everything. And I went over it with her, but she feels like she has blind spots. So for someone like her, what can she do to try to see what those blind spots are?
Sure. Go back to the 360 and ignore the numbers. Go to the statements at the very end. Usually there's two statements. There's the things, what do you like best about this person's communication style? And what would you like them to change, or how could they get stronger? They tell a story. Now, sometimes the story is very subtle. Sometimes because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, it's what I call the Valentine index. When you were a little kid, you put a Valentine in everybody's bag so nobody got their feelings hurt. Yeah. Okay, well, sometimes 360s are like that. But when you read the comments, sometimes, for example, mine early in my career is, Bob can be a little intense. That's another way to say Bob could be a pain in the ass. He can antagonize people. He can steamroller through. He'll run right over you. But they didn't say that because they were nice people. So I had to read into that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is she can pull 2 or 3 people that she really trusts aside. And she'll go, I'm really happy with my feedback. I know it's good. If there's one thing that I can do to improve, what would that be? There's a simple exercise that you can do, which is on a positive framework. You can ask 3 people in the organization, when have you seen me at my best? It's called the best reflected self assessment. And all you ask them to do is give you a specific example. No high level, well, you're good at team building, you're building synergy, creating new paradigms, something like that. One specific example. And if you lay down 9 examples, 3 from 3 different people, you'll see patterns of what works for you the best. So those are 2 things I suggest you do.
Okay. And I'll go ahead. Who is about to speak?
No, this is very good stuff. As I said earlier, I regard you as a mastermind in this field. I've learned so much from you.
Thank you.
From you personally, as well as books you have written. I'd like to, so we're talking about a 360, and not every company utilizes those.
Yes.
So my question is, in terms of today's business culture, meaning that it's more of an entrepreneurial startup culture than it is the established Fortune 100, Fortune 500 culture. Leaders in those smaller, quicker type organizations, what are some ways, if they're not able to leverage a 360 assessment, what are some valuable ways that individuals who want to still grow and want to still scale up those small startup operations, how can they best combat blind spots and becoming a victim of their own blind spots?
Sure. So let's just suppose you have somebody who wants to start off in their own business as an entrepreneur, but they're not quite there yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they go to a couple of people that know them and saying, knowing what it takes to get here, and if you could catalog 4 or 5 different sets of skills, what would those basic skills be? And then say, don't ask them to rate you in them because you're going to be nice. Ask them to rank order them from the top to the bottom. So let's suppose one skill is being able to make a strong business case when you're in front of a group of venture capitalists or any other revenue, crowdsourcing arrangement, whatever that you're going to. Can you
Sure.
make a good business case and be persuasive as a salesperson? The second thing might be, can you establish rapport? So there might be 4 or 5 categories. I would be asking them, based on that, what is the one improvement you could make that could patch the holes fastest that you might not be aware of? And then the second thing is model the best in the field. Ask them, are there 2 or 3 people that you think are exemplars in this area that you would suggest I watch and see how they do things? Maybe they're doing podcasts like this. Maybe there is something you can learn from that without even contacting them directly. But I think having them give you feedback, number 1, itemizing the skills, 2, rank ordering the skills, 3, giving you suggestions on the one area you need to work on, and then 4, helping you figure out who you can model from. Because if you're like me, if you see somebody do it well, you get it. It instantly goes into that.
Very good.
Yeah. So speaking on the 360 assessment, so say you've done a 360 assessment with a client and you met with them for the first time and you realize that he or she has problems at home and that's why they're behaving a certain way. From a coaching perspective, what would you do?
Well, immediately engage in deep therapy with them. Have them hold my hand. I sing Kumbaya. And, I prescribe medications. Obviously, those are the things that you don't do as a coach. Even though I have a master's in counseling psychology, and even though I had my shingle for a couple of years, there's a strong line. And I argue with my coaching friends who have doctorates in counseling and in clinical psychology. Don't wade into that because you don't have the same legal protections that you do as a clinical or counseling psychologist, somebody has been referred to the employee assistance program, for example. You don't have the same. So you might cross the line in terms of confidentiality and not even realize it. So if somebody brings up a personal issue with me, I want to say, let's talk about how it's impacting you at work. And let's talk about some simple stopgap things you can do to lower your stress level and deal with this. So for example, some things I can do as a coach is I can recommend a couple of meditation apps, things like Headspace, Calm, Buddhify, which have short things. I'm working with a client right now to help bring down their level. Sit in a car, just like I have my headphones on. If you do one of these things, no one knows whether or not you're meditating or listening to somebody talk on the phone, right? Or listening to a podcast. You can do it for 10 minutes, bring your tension level down. The second thing is to get help that the office can't get. And so then I refer them to the employee assistance program, which is, most companies have them, and they're set up not to do counseling, but to refer you over the wall to somebody on the other side to keep your stuff with your family confidential. The third thing I might suggest to them is a lot of times these are people that are so conscientious, they don't take vacation time. They don't take personal time. If you have something happening with your family and it's interfering with your work, especially during these times of COVID, I talked to somebody last week and they've got 2 kids with special health issues that they're worried about. And then their wife had this extremely serious accident. And all of this is happening while they're trying to work virtually from home. I'm saying, man, you need to get yourself a couple of personal days off. Pull back away, take care of your family first. Your business is going to understand it. You don't have to go into the details, just say, there's some things I'm working through like that. So I think part of what we can do in coaching is give people permission to reach out for help. You don't have to tell your boss why you're hurting. You can simply say, hey man, I can't go into it, but there's just some family stuff at home that requires my full attention right now. People get that, they understand it.
You know what?
Confidentiality, yeah. Please.
No, I just wish I'm just thinking about the conversation and about playing in the NFL, my former life, and how much needed this is, right? When I can tell you, Romby alluded to it earlier. We have this thing called the eye in the sky, and the eye in the sky is essentially a camera that catches every single step, every single breath during practice, and every inch of that film is watched, right? So you go out there and you go through the motions, and it gets filmed, and then you go into the study room and you watch it, right? And just some of those meetings, right? Coaches are in need of a lot of help. Some of them are, right? From a standpoint of how to engage, and even a standpoint of, maybe carrying, some potential blind spots that incite some triggers.
Well, that's why I think that you two guys, Romby and Oliver, are uniquely qualified. I mean, your experience both as professional athletes in the NFL and with your experience in executive coaching, that's a very powerful combination. I think you can bring that to the table. You empathize, you understand, you've been there, but you can also stand back and use your coaching skills much better than someone like I could. I mean, I feel comfortable coaching in a business environment, but for me to coach an NFL player with no experience as a professional athlete, yeah, my credibility is not there. My experience level's not there. Just like I don't do a lot of work on the public sector side, it's all private sector.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of truth in saying strength and vulnerability. In order to be coached, you have to be able to acknowledge some of those weaknesses and some gaps in the way you conduct yourself, the way you communicate. I'm curious, from being a coach, obviously all of us have blind spots. I remember being told years ago, I was telling Javier and Romby, I perceived myself as a certain person, as a leader, and getting the feedback, it was a strike to the heart. This was back in the early 90s, where the response was that they didn't see me as a leader, my colleagues, my peers, and that was really hurtful. But it made me acknowledge, it made me work towards earning that right. So as a coach, as you're coaching people to address blind spots, who's keeping you in check as a coach? How do you make sure that you don't have a blind spot, and who do you turn to?
Well, I've transcended all weaknesses. I am the mastermind. And I'm running for office soon, and sitting near you. No, I actually have my own coach, and that's called my wife. And we've been together for 36 years. And like I think most relationships that have survived that long, she's also my business partner and my best friend. So if I do something and she's aware of it, she lets me know. If my tension level and stress level, like everybody's during COVID, is up a bit, right? If that's beginning to interfere a little bit with her or with other people, she'll tell me, and she tells me in a loving, caring way. So I think the thing about coaching, if we don't have somebody like that in our life, I always ask people in coaching, who's your best friend? And I'm working with somebody right now, and it's really, really hard because, like you guys, this person was a professional athlete for several years, but was so driven that he said, honestly, Bob, I've never developed those friendships. So that means you're 100% focused around, your spouse. In a work environment, coaches can't start dealing with blind spots. Coaches have to build relationship and trust first, which is why it takes more than a couple of sessions because people let their guard down. You know, they're like this with you in coaching, and they're like this. And are you going to be talking to my boss? Can I share things with you? And those are honest questions.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I can do to help is I can afford to be vulnerable. I ask them initially, what do you want to know about me? Are you married? Do you have any kids? And how long you've been here? And I tell them whatever part of my story they want to hear. I try not to go too long and bore them, but I share things with them. And they appreciate that because I'm not sitting there with a notebook just taking data, you know, this cold clinical thing with data extraction from people, right? So does that help? Those are some things I look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, as a football player, and I realized this when I transitioned out to corporate America, or somebody that might be transitioning to a different company, to a different culture, what can an individual leader do to prevent or minimize the impacts of blind spots?
Sure. Let's talk about, I always ask people in my coaching classes, maybe you guys remember this, I say, when is your story first written by the organization? And people say the first day at work, and I say, no. It happens usually a couple of weeks before that. It happens during your job interview. Okay, the person that snubs the administrative assistant as you're walking in to the big boss's office because they're not an important person, people talk about that. The person who gripes because they had to make a last minute change in, you know, the flight arrangements, even though they didn't have any control over that, they talk about that. Wow, I had one person turn around and the first thing he said in the office was, wow, this is a lot smaller than the office I came from. People talked about that. You know, it's like, does this guy have an ego this big? So people like you, Sal, when you're recruiting, okay, you play a very powerful role. Some of the best coaching advice I've gotten were from recruiters who pulled me by the side and said, Bob, I want to give you honest feedback about how you came across in that last job interview. People like you, but people trust you, but people feel comfortable with you, but. And so the one thing I realized is I had to soften up a little bit because I have to show them I'm a professional and technical and I know what I'm talking about. Now, all they got was this stern, firm accountants with no ability to joke or relax or anything. So it was my recruiting, my recruiters that really helped me before I walked in, and I learned to trust them. I learned to turn around even after I got the job, say, okay, I've got the job now. Now give me what I call the warts and all feedback on Bob. What do I need to be careful about? Because I don't want to step in anything. The second thing that you can do is ask for forgiveness. You can walk imagine a person the first week on the job, part of the conversation is, hey, I'm really new here. And every organization has their way of doing stuff. If you would just give me a little feedback the first couple of days or weeks, if there's anything I'm tripping over, you know, that would be really helpful. I'd appreciate hearing from you as somebody who's survived and done well here. And people will do that. But there is such a need to impress people. And we're so worried about the image that it backfires. They go in a back room. They try to create this big change plan. They don't vet it with anybody. They don't ask for feedback. They're moving around with their elbows, knocking people around. Hopefully, they have what we call a transitional coach to help them in that role. Sometimes the internal HR or talent development person takes on that role. But even before then, best source of feedback, get it from people that are interviewing you. I say, suppose you don't go through a recruiter. Well, you go into an organization, you didn't get the job. Ask someone that you know in the company who's talked to one of the people how you came across. Not why you weren't hired, because it might be technical skills, but how you came across. So give that person honest feedback to share back with you.
That's a great topic, Romby, that you brought up. I'm having a guest at one of my events coming up, Larry Sherrill, and he's talked about creating a personal board of directors. So very similar to what you're talking about, trusted individuals who will give you objective perspective, give objective feedback on you as a person. And this is more so for a professional transition to a different job. But I think this is applicable in life of just how you conduct yourself, how you communicate. So internal board of directors, I think that's a great segue, if you will, to what you just said. Just real quickly, since you and I both share HR backgrounds, during COVID-19, what do you think, just real quickly, what is the biggest challenge for HR right now?
I think there's two things. I think the first thing is keeping connected with people. And that is, it's so easily to become dispirited, despondent, feeling lonely, feeling cut off. Zoom calls and things like this are great, guys, but it's not enough, right? Mm-hmm. So I've had some people who are doing things like virtual happy hours on Friday, right? So it's the end of the week at 4 or 5 o'clock, instead of meeting at a bar, meet at the pool or at the balcony, everybody with their drink in hand, and they chill and they relax and they talk with everybody. It doesn't have to be an alcoholic drink. So any way that you can stay connected, that's number one. And the second thing is over communicate, because not everyone's going to get the email. If you're going to be videotaping something like this, archive it. Provide links to people so no one feels like they've messed out. Make sure that people are in their teams talking to other folks. I have some people who are working with interns right now from different colleges. And so this year this is an investment company. They have not brought the interns down to Dallas. The interns are all over the US. Well, that's good because they're safe. But the bad thing is they feel cut off from the organization. So what they're trying to do is create kind of a welcome greeting. So they'll put them on a Zoom call, not for business stuff, but just to introduce them to a couple of people and talk informally and say, oh, so you're up in Michigan or you're in Colorado. Tell me about where you're living and what that's like right now. And you talk informally, you make a relationship, you feel more comfortable when you pick up the phone with people. And those are big things, small things that are overlooked, but big things actually HR can do.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough time we live in, guys. And I think one of the things that's going to happen is it's going to be a test for leaders in terms of who is flexible and who is not. So those people that can marshal their skills and show that they can adapt, I think will emerge out of here in a very good place.
Absolutely. Adapting with agility and balance.
That's a good thing.
Every day. Yeah, let's not adapt and then fall on our faces. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, Dr. Bob. I want to thank you for your time and for your input. This is a part of the show where we go into our dope recommendations, and we have a book or a quote or a movie or something that our audience can tap into that will create a lasting impression, especially with what's going on today with some of the COVID that we kind of begun this with and how things have kind of progressed since then. And it's just a time of caring. We all need to have someone who's caring in our lives so we can care for ourselves. And here on the Dope Show, we believe that sharing is caring. So, Sal, can you set us off today with our dope recommendations?
Yes. So today, instead of a book, I have a quote. And my wife asked me something this weekend, and I quipped back real quickly. I said, well, I was born ready. And so that brought me back to what my boss years ago had told me before a call or before an appointment. We'd go on road trips. He just said, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And I know that seems like a simple recipe. It's easier said than done. But in whatever in life, be it business or your elevator pitch, from a recruiting perspective, if you're in transition, just be prepared. And I know that's easier said than done, but with this extended and elongated time off, I think it's a good time to kind of prepare yourself and just stay prepared so you don't have to get ready. So that's my dope recommendation.
Awesome. Romby, what you got?
So my dope recommendation, the name of our show is Developing One's Perspective Every Day. We have Dr. Bonner on here, so I recommend his book, Accelerating Your Development as a Leader. And it's only right. My wife used this book, by the way, Dr. Bonner, in her hypo program. She referenced this book a lot throughout the projects that she had. Yeah, a lot of the books that you recommended to me, she used in her hypo program because they had them do a lot of assignments. So thank you for that. And my wife thanks you as well.
What a plug. What a plug. And hey, that's good stuff, Romby. You bring in the book. I have a book title too, but I don't have the book with me. I just way to blindside me with that. The book that I have is called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it's by Dr. Mary Lee Adams. So especially for anyone who's going through some transition or, as we like to say, transformation. Shouts out to our man, Sal.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone going through a transformation in life, changing the nature of your questions can definitely impact in your life. This brings us to you, Dr. Barner. Do you have anything you want to leave our audience with?
I'll give you a quote, and it was from a 13th century mystic, and the person's name is very long, but if you look up the quote, you'll find it on Google. And it is, all you truly are, is what you have left after a shipwreck. And I say that because so many people right now feel that they're shipwrecked. They don't know if they're going to be in temporary employment, if they're going to be unemployed or let go. The companies are reorganizing. They don't know how long COVID's going to be. And I just go through a meditation sometime where I take off my title, I park it, I take off my degrees, I take off my sport coat. I walk away from all that, and the essence of who we are that cannot be shaken, cannot be diminished, and cannot be hurt is all the stuff there that's a really important stuff. And if you imagine yourself surfacing on a beach with a shipwreck behind you, the essential part of you is still there. And I think if we can keep that in mind, we won't be banged around by any storms that we encounter in life.
Absolutely. And we are enough. That's awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you. Robbie, you want to take us home?
Yeah. So thanks for joining us today. Tune in next time to another dope experience. Now it's time for you to go be dope and give hope. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Dope Experience. Our hope is that you're left with a new perspective to formulate a blueprint of growth and transformation. Make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you consume podcasts. Stay dope.